Loading. Welcome to Access the Animus.
Hello everyone and welcome to a new video here on Access the Animus. Our analysis of the story of Assassin's Creed Valhalla is almost getting to its end, with its second to last episode dedicated to the historical ending of the game. In the video, we're going to analyze all the events concerning Eivor's and Sigurd's journey to the Yggdrasil Vault, with the access to the Valhalla Simulation, the final confrontation between Eivor and Odin, and our interpretation of it, and finally we're going to discuss Basim attempting his revenge on Eivor and the meaning that this had for him. We're also going to point out several little details you might have missed from the historical ending, ranging from what seems to be the carving of Kassandra's spear, to several dialogue lines that are actually connected to other events in the game, and lastly a potential reference to Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking it, subscribing to our channel and turning the notifications on so you don't miss any of our future updates. And with that out of the way, let's dive into the historical ending of Assassin's Creed Valhalla. We finished the last episode of this series with Eivor finally and reluctantly deciding to follow Sigurd to Norway in order to achieve his presumed destiny, even though she really did not understand what he meant. A sad feeling, to be honest, as she is a main character that almost throughout the entire story does not get the hang of who the Isu are, what the relics are capable of, and what their vaults were built for, or at least doesn't comment significantly on them, as we'll see. After a brief pit stop to see Sigurd's father Styrbjörn and to have closure about him, Eivor and Sigurd finally decide to move on to what Sigurd called the end of his road. Before jumping on the longship though, Sigurd mentions his visions are stronger and more present than ever, and, if asked about them, he does mention a door embedded in ice with a Saga stone placed at the top of it. That's the door that we're going to see soon, but this also means, as Sigurd is experiencing Tyr's memories, that the Yggdrasil Vault was also originally embedded in ice during the Isu era. Sigurd continues mentioning more memories and visions, featuring the door opening, the Yggdrasil device, here called Life Tree, and the golden fields of Valhalla, that is the Valhalla Simulation shown in the game's ending. Again, these are Tyr's memories, meaning that Tyr either experienced or helped programming the Valhalla Simulation, and this will show later, as we'll see Sigurd is even able to control it. Lastly, Sigurd mentions seeing the faces of quote-unquote our gods, and being called friend, brother and warrior by them. It's interesting because by saying our gods, Sigurd is cryptically telling Eivor that he's had memories about the people that the Norse considered to be gods, but alas, she doesn't get what he means. On the contrary though, she does finally share she's had visions of her own, mentioning Odin, the Gungnir, Fenrir and the Word Tree too, and interestingly enough, she says she saw a man with the and doesn't finish her sentence. Judging from the camera work, she's about to say a man with one arm, a direct reference to Tyr, and again, at least at this point, Eivor isn't able to make a connection. It's interesting to see how Eivor's and Sigurd's visions differ significantly. In fact, while Sigurd's ones seem to depict the actual events, character, and locations from the Isu era, as we'll see later, Eivor saw everything through a mythological veil, which practically is very likely to be there because fans have been used to and asked about this kind of content since Assassin's Creed Origins was released, but in lore showcases that the Isu memories within sages can present themselves in different ways based on the various reincarnations. The two then moved on to get closer to the destination fixed in Sigurd's mind and eventually found the cave where the Yggdrasil Vault was located. Sigurd pressed on to reach the gate, but at least in our playthrough, Eivor took another route in the cave amidst the First Eve ruins and reached the room where Gungnir, a spear of Eden that belonged to the Isu Odin, was located. Strangely enough, in this particular occasion, Eivor seems to recognize the spear as Gungnir, and we believe that she recognizes it because in a few occasions during the memory corridor scenes, Eivor did see Odin wielding the exact same spear. Too bad she never mentioned it again afterwards, at least for what we know. After this detour, Eivor reached her brother at the gate of the Yggdrasil Vault, and finally saw the slot where the Saga stone was originally laying, as he mentioned earlier and as she herself has somewhat envisioned during the Xenophorshire arc, as we showed in the last video of this series. That's where Sigurd pronounces the exact same words written on the Saga stone, in the Isu language of course, in order to open the gate. This means that the text placed over the Saga stone, and thus over the gate, was the password for the gate itself, but that's not all. The password itself, as mentioned in the files in Layla's laptop, means when destruction and death laid before us and the solar flare is reaching to the calculator of futures we run, which isn't a random sentence considering where the Saga stone was originally placed. In fact, as it was located right before the entrance to the Yggdrasil chamber, it means, at least in our opinion, that faced with the known threat, here called destruction and death, of the upcoming solar flare known as the Toba catastrophe, the Asgardian Isu actually did run to the Yggdrasil supercomputer, here called Calculator of Futures, in order to find ways to avert the catastrophe. So yeah, not just a foreboding sentence, but a very real one connected to what the Isu would have found had they crossed those gates during the Isu era. Again, Eivor didn't get why Sigurd knew such words, but the gate opened and they went through until they reached an elevator that Sigurd commanded once again, and through which they saw the huge Yggdrasil supercomputer for the first time. Now, the Yggdrasil supercomputer is a device that, based on what we see in the game, is capable of multiple tasks, like preserving the body and psyche of its users over time and simulating potential futures, alternate realities and counterfactual stories as mentioned in the game's database and as we'll see soon enough. Thus, the two walked from the elevator to a bridge leading to the supercomputer, as Eivor once again asked Sigurd how he knew about everything they had in front of their eyes. They passed another tower-like elevator, which is where the fight with Basim would later take place, and finally reached the base of the device with the several claw-like branches that very much remind of the animus ones from the Assassin's Creed movie. This is where Eivor saw Svala already hooked up to the machine. As we mentioned in the previous episode in this series, when getting to Ravensthorpe, Valka mentioned that her mother had found her peace walking through a world seen only in dreams, which is basically what we will see her doing in the Valhalla Simulation, again somewhat proving that Valka might have accompanied her mother to the Yggdrasil device, or most likely heard about it from her. Another interesting notion about Svala, based on the recent Valhalla ending interview with former narrative director Darby McDevitt, is that it's likely that she was the one that activated the simulation that Eivor and Sigurd would have subsequently joined, and not only that. Darby did mention that possibly Svala was the only Asgardian sage that properly used the Yggdrasil device as it was intended. In fact, the Isu Freyja lived her whole life during the Isu era, then used the 7th method before possibly dying during the Toba catastrophe, then she was reborn in the 9th century AD, then she lived her whole life in her new human vessel, and at the end of her life, just before dying, she hooked herself up to the Yggdrasil device so she could live in its simulations forever. Eventually, Eivor reached Sigurd at the base of the supercomputer, in front of a spherical biometric device similar to the global Aurora Borealis device that Desmond touched when he sacrificed his life on December the 21st, 2012. Interestingly enough, in front of the spherical device we can see a carving in the wall with a very familiar shape, which is that of the original Spear of Eden or Spear of Leonidas from Assassin's Creed Odyssey. The very same slot could be found in the Forge of Hephaestus in Odyssey, that is where the spear gets upgraded in the game, and it's unclear what it is doing in Valhalla too. Is this hinting at a future appearance by Kassandra in Valhalla's DLCs, maybe in the unannounced Meteor expansion, or was it part of a scrapped Kassandra bit in the main game? It might not mean anything, but Valhalla's character concept artist Yelin Kim recently tweeted Malaka, so... After seeing the spherical device, Sigurd states he remembers that it's indeed that metal sphere that activates the Yggdrasil, which indeed seems to turn on as he speaks, although the Yggdrasil itself was already active and glowing before that. The sphere itself is also very important for the modern day ending, so keep it in mind as we'll discuss this in our next and final video of this series. Sigurd also explains to Eivor how the Yggdrasil works, with the branches allowing them to reach Valhalla, or a simulation of that anyway, and Eivor seems hesitant, somewhat accepting that these are quote-unquote tools of the gods, but still not understanding why Sigurd knows all of that, even if he is basically telling her. So Sigurd went on first, and Eivor right after him, but before being taken by one of the AC movie-like claws, she pronounced "Hail you givers, a guest has come," which is a sentence taken directly from the Havamal, or the Song of Havi, that is a collection of Old Norse poems from the Viking Age, aimed at presenting advice for living, proper conduct, and wisdom. When Eivor comes to her senses, she finally finds herself in Valhalla, or better yet in the simulation of Valhalla generated by the Yggdrasil device. After waking up from a bed, she joins the simulation's version of Odin's Hall, where she sees a lot of Viking warriors feasting before a battle, and where she's even welcomed as Havi, and those are the same words pronounced by other NPCs in the Asgard arc when Odin reaches that version of the Hall of the Slain, hinting at how the simulation is also built upon its users' memories. Amidst the crowd, Eivor finds Svala, much younger and dressed up as the Norse mythology Veil version of Freya, another nod at which Isu she's the reincarnation of. Eivor sees Sigurd too, noticing he has both of his arms again, of course another strong hint at this not being real. In the Norse mythology, the dead warriors would join Odin in his hall to prepare for their final fight during the events of Ragnarok. Now the Valhalla simulation has a version of that, where at the end of each day the users do take part in a major battle, in a beautiful field with a huge tree in the background which might represent Glacier, the tree located outside of the doors of Asgard in the Norse mythology. Eivor and Sigurd partake in the battle, and as we can see, the forces on the field are dressed up as Vikings and Saxons, another hint at this being a simulation also based on Eivor's, Sigurd's, and Svala's perception and memories. Exhilarated by the battle, Sigurd asks Eivor to fight him and tells her not to hold back as they shouldn't fear any harm in there, hinting at the fact that he himself knows that what is happening in there is not properly real. Interestingly enough, the fight ends up with Sigurd losing his arm, which plays very nicely around the themes of inevitability and fate that the entire narrative of the game is based on, and hints at Tyr's true essence within Sigurd, an effect that the Valhalla simulation will have on Eivor too. In fact, in a later scene, she is hit by an arrow, making her lose her left eye, a hint at the essence of Odin living within her. In any case, at the end of the battle, a horn resounds and the day in the simulation is over, which leads to Eivor waking up once again at the start of the simulation. As the days in the simulation go by, she notices similar behaviors compared to her first day within it, seeing every time Sigurd with both of his arms, fighting the battle in the Golden Field, seeing Sigurd losing his arm again, but in a few occasions, Eivor seems to also spot her father Varin. This goes on until one day Eivor is woken up by Sigurd, who actually brings Varin to her. Her father tries to compliment her, but she has none of it and immediately kills him because she is strongly convinced that it's not really him, as he is not meant to partake in Valhalla. In fact, to her, Varin should not be in Valhalla because in her opinion he died a coward, and according to the Norse belief, only those who died honorably in combat with their weapon in their hand could access Odin's hall. This is very important, as mentioned by former narrative director Darby McDevitt, as Varin's presence in the Valhalla simulation is the catalyst that makes Eivor realize their Valhalla program isn't real, prompting her to decide to get out of it. Sigurd states that Varin was his gift to Eivor because he has power within Valhalla, that is within the simulation, and he can do as he pleases, showing how the Tyr part of him is kicking in and allows him to control the simulation from within. Varin even disappears in front of their eyes, and it seems like the simulation is about to run normally again, but Eivor becomes more inquisitive, even with Svala. Svala herself tells her not to worry because they can bring all the people she loves in there, showing many of the members of the Raven clan in a way that is so reminiscent of Edward Kenway seeing all the people that left a mark on his life during the parting glass segment of Black Flag's ending. Seeing all those people in the hall is the straw that breaks the camel's back for Eivor, as she knows that most of these people are still alive and breathing. Maybe she herself is able to make them disappear, as she is believing less and less in what she sees in front of her. Svala confronts her, comparing the empty death taking place in the real world with the infinite life within the simulation, with no death, no pain, no loss, and no betrayal. That's the choice that Svala made, not having much time to live in the world anyway, but as Eivor says, that kind of life is not for her, leading her to bid Svala her final goodbye. Right after that, Eivor confronts Sigurd too, suggesting both of them to leave, but Sigurd says he enjoys Valhalla even if it's a lie, because he is someone in there, because he has power, and especially because he will never die in there. Eivor closes her eyes and kills all the warriors around her, showing that she has control over the simulation too, and then she pronounces a very peculiar sentence. Cows die, family die, you must die. The only thing that never dies is the reputation of the one who's died. This is another sentence taken from the Havamal collection of poems, and it's even more interesting as this is the actual sentence written in the runes in the starting screen of the game, as discovered by Christophorus at La Red de Erudito back in May. Eivor then tries to convince Sigurd to leave the simulation by suggesting that the real glory and reputation can be found only in the real world, but when Sigurd finally agrees to leave, the personification of Odin, as seen in the Memory Corridor confessions, appears, forcing Eivor to faint and to stay in the simulation. Now this is interesting, as we believe that this version of Odin that we have seen at the start of the game when Eivor picked Varin's axe, the one we saw in all the confession kill rooms trying to steer Eivor into a quest for power, glory and personal gain, and the one we are seeing here, all of that is representing the essence of the original Isu Odin within Eivor's blood and mind, trying to take control of her body in the real world as it happened for Loki and Basim. When Eivor comes back to her senses, she finds herself in a new environment, the same that appears in the Memory Corridor kill rooms, which in this occasion we can also interpret as a new simulation generated by the Yggdrasil and controlled by Odin, as he is still asking why she wants to leave that place, meaning that she hasn't yet. Odin has Eivor walk with him through some of the main events of her story and the reputation she gained from them, and even in this occasion he seems to be wielding Gungnir. He is trying to prove that she has already earned her reputation and glory and thus her place in Valhalla and the simulation, and because of that he is trying to convince her and Sigurd to not leave. Of course we can imagine an ulterior motivation by Odin here, as within the Yggdrasil it's very likely that his conscience might have way more control over Eivor and everyone else. Odin then brings Eivor in front of a door that is so very similar to the one he showed her during the Xenophorshire arc when discussing the Saga stone and when he tried to make her remember the gates to the Yggdrasil device. Eventually Odin, or in our interpretation Odin's conscience within Eivor, confronts her, telling her he always guided her into what she has now, while she denies it, stating that all of that came from herself. This ends up in a fight between the two, with Eivor always trying everything she can to exit the simulation and Odin bringing her back, trying to finally take over. Every time Eivor falls, a hologram appears, showcasing an axe as a hint for the players to understand what they have to do, but also every time a member of Eivor's friends and family appears next to the gates to exit the simulation, cheering on her and telling her to stand. Within the simulation, we can interpret them as Eivor thinking about the people that she cares about and that she wants to protect if she manages to leave the simulation. Moreover, if Eivor tries to flee the fight with Odin to rejoin her friends and family, it is through the axe itself that Odin is able to draw her back on the battlefield through the use of Gungnir. The axe prompt means that the player and Eivor have to unequip the axe, and that is not just some axe, that's Varin's axe, and of course that's symbolic. In fact, Odin's vision started appearing and then getting hold of Eivor on the day when Varin was killed, and then especially when she picked up his axe in Norway, and so by dropping it, she's also dropping, or shall we say leaving behind Odin, thus effectively slowly taking full control of her own body. A confirmation of that is that she doesn't have any other Odin visions after exiting the simulation, but then again Odin's conscience is in her DNA, so we still wouldn't rule out any other new Odin appearances in the future DLCs. Eventually, Eivor tries to flee by holding Sigurd's hand, and is able to fend off Odin through the use of her hidden blade, causing him to manifest his wrath, hitting her and all her allies as they keep trying to get her back, which can be interpreted as Eivor dragging herself outside of the simulation out of her love and need for the people she cares about. That can really be seen in one of the best moments of the game, where Odin asks what more she needs beside the power and glory he gave her, and of course she answers with a cathartic everything else, which allows her to finally exit the simulation. When she finally finds herself on the ground in the real world, she states, "Sigurd, are you with me?" Of course looking out for her brother, but this specific line is interesting as it is the same line pronounced by Basim towards Alethea when he is finally released from the Yggdrasil device. Sadly, Eivor doesn't find Sigurd with her, as plot twist, he's been captured by Basim, who has trailed them all the way back to Norway and is now finally showing his true colors as the reincarnation of Loki, who wants to get revenge on Odin's reincarnation after all the events that took place in the Isu era, which we analyzed in the early videos of this series. And speaking of our previous videos, we have to rectify a mistake from our last one. In fact, Basim orders Eivor to get close to him so he can have a proper look at her, and says that he was blinded to the truth for so long, and finally, as a lot of you pointed out in our comments, and only at this point, he recognizes her to be Odin's reincarnation. At last then, after waiting literally for ages, Loki, who has full control of Basim, can have his final revenge and fight with the reincarnation of his former friend who imprisoned his son for life on the first Civ elevator that we saw earlier. Too bad that even here Eivor has no idea whatsoever about what is really happening, even if Basim himself hints at the grudge and fight being about his son and suggesting her to look into her memories. During the fight, Basim pins Eivor down and forces her to show him her neck to have confirmation that she really is a reincarnation produced by the Seventh Method, and ironically laughs at the fact that he did not recognize it was her, specifically because the wolf had bitten her when she was a kid and erased the symbol that is placed on the neck of every Asgardian sage, as we saw in our previous videos. Once again, even after 75,000 years, Eivor bested Basim, who decided to flee to attack Sigurd. After a sequence of parkour amidst the first civilization buildings and ruins, Eivor reaches them, and funnily enough they are both talking to each other as their Isu counterparts. Sigurd calls Basim Oathbreaker as Loki broke his oath to Odin and to Asgard by smuggling his son while also enabling a battle with the Greco-Roman Isu, which caused so many casualties, while Basim calls him Justice Bringer because, well, Tyr was the Lord of Justice. Basim even says that he was also so kind, a reference to the fact that Tyr was the only one that cared for his son Fenrir in Asgard, but eventually he chose Odin's side, the wrong one according to Basim, which mirrors the threats by Fenrir that we saw at the end of the Asgard arc, when he said that Tyr's kind words would have not saved him. Eivor saves her brother in the nick of time, prompting Basim to fight her as Sigurd runs towards the spherical device that controls the Yggdrasil. The fight goes on with more Isu references, and eventually, even while receiving some more strong blows by Basim, Eivor finally manages to have him forcefully clutched by the Yggdrasil device, prompting Sigurd to drastically reduce the power of the huge supercomputer in a move that kind of echoes Desmond's sacrifice in Assassin's Creed 3, so that Basim can be trapped in the machine once and for all. Sort of. And that was it for today's video, and we're so happy we finally managed to tackle the historical ending of the game after so much time. Join us in our next and final video of this series, where we'll have a look at the modern day ending of the game as a consequence of what happened in the 9th century AD and Basim's potential plans for the future. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in our next video.